They laughed at him, as if his words were nothing more than a child's delusion, a skinny boy in worn-out clothes daring to face a millionaire in his flawless suit. Everyone in the room believed the verdict had already been given. The businessman's daughter, in a coma for months, would have her life support removed that night. The doctor had already declared there was no hope, and the looks around were filled with resignation. But that boy, coming from the streets, with eyes burning with faith, stood up against them all. He had nothing to offer but his trembling voice, yet it carried unshakable conviction. "Don't turn it off. She's going to wake up." The silence that followed was suffocating, a mix of shock and disdain. The millionaire smiled, a smile heavier with arrogance than compassion. But no one knew. The boy hid a secret bond with the sleeping young woman, something that would defy all logic. The weight of inequality was clear in every detail. The boy stood barefoot, his hands dirty with dust, yet his eyes steady, as if he had already faced more pain than most adults in that room. The millionaire, on the other hand, radiated power. His fortune was well known, his name on magazine covers, his coldness feared by employees and family alike. Between them stretched a chasm, a man who could buy anything, and a boy who only had the courage to speak. The contrast was so striking that the onlookers nearly laughed, but stopped when they felt the intensity of the boy's words. This wasn't a common plea. There was an invisible force, almost supernatural, that made even the most skeptical hesitate for a second. But the millionaire didn't hesitate. He ordered the doctor to proceed, his voice cold, final, like sealing an irreversible deal. Yet the boy didn't back down. With each step toward the girl's bedside, he carried not just his faith but the pain of all the unseen, all those ignored for lacking titles or wealth. His breaking voice cut through the air. "She hears me. I know she hears me." Suddenly, a detail unnoticed by most revealed itself. The faintest twitch of her fingers, like a spark of life hiding in the shadows. The boy knew he wasn't mistaken, and that certainty lit a fire in his chest. Meanwhile, the millionaire's eyes burned with impatience. The delay irritated him, as if the decision was just another bureaucratic burden to settle. But the boy wouldn't let him rest. Every second, his presence became more bothersome, like a grain of sand scratching the pride of a giant. It wasn't just faith anymore, it was defiance. He dared to question the absolute power of the city's most influential man. It was like watching a lamb face a lion, not with claws or teeth, but with the strength of conviction. The air in the room had turned into tension itself, and in that moment, the boy's disadvantage became his greatest weapon, because no one expected anything from him. No one believed in his voice, and that's why every word struck like thunder. He was the unlikely one, the invisible, the discarded. But before the arrogance of the wealthy, the coldness of doctors, and the family's resignation, he was the only living flame. The millionaire didn't yet know it, but that boy wasn't there by chance. His presence was the prelude to a revelation that would change everything, and prove that power isn't always held by those with money. The silence of the room was shattered by something no one expected. The boy didn't just know the young woman in the coma. He began revealing memories only someone close to her could possibly have. He spoke of childhood moments, of songs she used to hum in secret, of fears she never shared with strangers. The millionaire's eyes widened, unable to grasp how a poor boy could know so much. Doctors and relatives exchanged uneasy glances. What had sounded like delusion began to take shape as an unsettling enigma. The boy no longer trembled. His voice, steady now, rang out like an undeniable truth. "She promised me she would come back, and I know she will." With each word, the weight of the secret grew heavier. The boy wasn't just an inconvenient intruder. He was the missing link, the piece of the puzzle no one had noticed. He revealed that he met the millionaire's daughter while she volunteered at an orphanage. This wasn't public knowledge. She had never flaunted her kindness in newspapers or social media. That detail left everyone stunned. The girl, so discreet, had built an invisible bond with the boy who now stood as her last hope. The millionaire felt his mask of control begin to crack as he realized he had ignored a side of his daughter he had never known. But the boy went further. He revealed that, shortly before the accident that left her in a coma, she confided a greater secret. She was about to expose a truth that could ruin her father's reputation, a scandal he had kept buried. The millionaire's heart pounded, his face hardened, and for the first time, he showed fear. If this was true, his downfall would be irreversible. The boy carried not only hope, but also the key to a silent revenge. His presence wasn't chance, it was destiny. The atmosphere in the room began to shift. Power was no longer solely in the hands of the wealthy man. The mere existence of something he couldn't control, coming from a street boy, was enough to shake his confidence. Still at the girl's bedside, the boy whispered words only she would know. It was almost like a secret password, a bond of souls that transcended social barriers. At that moment, everyone in the room felt as if she could really hear. The heavy air turned into suffocating suspense. The secret, now revealed, wasn't just about the bond between the two. It was also a veiled threat to the untouchable figure of the millionaire. Each word from the boy exposed not only the fragility of a young woman in a coma, but also the fragility of an empire built on lies. The millionaire tried to regain control, raising his voice and ordering the boy to be removed. But it was too late. The seed had been planted, and no one in that room would ever look at the situation the same way again. The story had already turned. The initial shock gave way to fury. The millionaire could not stand being confronted, especially by someone he deemed irrelevant. His voice thundered, ordering the guards to remove the boy immediately. But in that moment, the family's reaction was unexpected. Some hesitated, others asked for calm, fearing the revelation might be true. The boy stood his ground. "If you throw me out, everyone will know what she told me," he said, staring at the man who controlled not only wealth but also the decision of life and death. The conflict was no longer just about a girl in a coma. It had become an open battle between wealth and courage, arrogance and faith. The millionaire walked toward the boy, crouched to meet his eyes, and whispered coldly, "You don't know who you're dealing with." But the boy's reply cut deeper, "And you don't know who your daughter really was." The room split. The doctor, under pressure, no longer seemed so convinced about turning off the machines. Relatives whispered among themselves, suspecting there was more at stake. The millionaire's absolute power was crumbling before a boy who owned nothing but carried the truth. The tension reached unbearable heights. The millionaire, used to bending boards, politicians, and even judges to his will, found himself unable to control the narrative inside that room. His authority was questioned for the first time in public, and by someone who should have been invisible. He tried to regain ground, dismissing the boy's words as delusions. But with every sentence, the child gained more credibility. The strength was no longer in money, but in emotional impact. Everyone felt there was authenticity in his voice. The room became an arena of power. The millionaire threatened, the boy resisted, and the audience, doctors, nurses, family members, became the silent jury of this clash. It was as if every heart in the room was being pulled in opposite directions. Some wanted to believe in the impossible, while others clung to cold logic. But the boy knew victory wouldn't come from physical force or wealth. It would come from persistence. "If you turn her off now, you will never know peace, because truth always finds its way," he said, his eyes watery but his voice firm. In this uneven duel, the millionaire began to feel what he had never felt before, fear of his own impotence. The boy, small and vulnerable, had become a mirror reflecting his deepest flaws. He couldn't simply crush that presence. The harder he tried, the more his image of control crumbled. It was power conflict in its purest form, not between equals, but between extremes. On one side, the empire of money. On the other, the flame of truth. And everyone in that room knew that when such opposite forces collide, something inevitable is about to happen. The boy moved closer to the bed, ignoring disapproving stares. His small, trembling hand rested on the young woman's, and in that simple gesture, something powerful filled the room. It wasn't just faith, it was pure love, an invisible bond no millionaire could buy or destroy. He began speaking to her as if no one else existed. He recalled promises, brief but intense moments, and whispered with tenderness, "I'm here, I'll never leave." The absolute silence of the room contrasted with the strength of his words, capable of breaking through the walls that science insisted on raising. The millionaire watched with hardened eyes, but inside something stirred. He who had always believed that money could solve everything couldn't understand how a poor boy radiated such strength. The love in that scene was something he had never truly experienced. His life had always been about business, deals, and contracts. Yet this child, with nothing but a sincere heart, moved not only the entire room, but also what little humanity still lingered within him. Even unconscious, his daughter seemed to respond to that presence, as if love itself were a secret call. The boy went on, each word like a hymn of resistance. He reminded her of afternoons when she smiled at the orphanage children, of the advice she whispered to him, of the times she said that even in silence, she would always hear a voice that called her truly. Those memories became a bridge between life and death, and everyone felt a chill run down their spine. In that moment, no medical logic could explain the overwhelming sense that she was listening. Love laid bare had the power to turn the impossible into something tangible. The girl's mother, silenced for so long by her husband's dominance, let a tear slip down her face. For the first time, she saw something money could never defeat, the purity of a bond born from nothing, yet carrying the intensity of ages. She grasped the millionaire's arm, begging him to wait, but he resisted, clinging to disbelief. The conflict deepened, not just between power and faith, but between reason and heart. The boy, fragile in the grand scheme, became a warrior. His weapon was simple, unconditional love, and that love began to disarm everyone around. The doctor, once insisting on switching off the machines, now hesitated in a faint voice. The guards, ordered to remove the boy, stood still, touched by the weight of the moment. The millionaire felt cornered, not by the child, but by what the scene revealed, that all his wealth could never buy the connection unfolding before him. The boy's love for the girl not only kept her alive, it threatened to dismantle the fortress of coldness he had built around himself. The boy knew his words alone wouldn't be enough to break the millionaire's resistance, so he made a decision no one expected. With a steady voice, he declared that he was willing to give up everything he had, however little it might be, in exchange for more time for the young woman. If I must, I'll take her place. If I must, I'll spend my nights here by her side, watching over her until she wakes. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. A boy with nothing, offering the only treasure he had, his own life, his youth, his hope. This was no performance, it was pure sacrifice. The girl's mother felt her heart break at the sight. In that boy, she saw the courage she had never found in her husband. He was ready to erase himself out of love, while the millionaire, unable to grasp such a gesture, hid behind his pride. The contrast between them grew clearer with each moment. On one side, the cold calculations of losses and gains. On the other, the limitless devotion of someone who would give anything to protect who he loved. The boy had made his choice, and that choice was beginning to dismantle the wealthy man's entire facade of power. The doctor, overcome with emotion, whispered that he had never seen anything like it. He was used to cold farewells, to decisions made from protocols and numbers. But now before him stood a boy ready to fight against statistics and diagnoses, armed only with faith and selflessness. The sacrifice suddenly became the most powerful force in the room, because no calculation could compete with the purity of someone willing to give everything for another. In that moment, the girl's fragile life seemed to find a new reason to hold on. The millionaire, however, still refused to yield. He called it foolishness, a cheap spectacle. He tried to ridicule the boy, but his voice lacked its former strength. Each attempt at belittling was weaker than the greatness of the sacrifice. Those present no longer saw him as an absolute authority. They saw him as a cornered man, unable to understand the language of the heart. The boy, tears streaming, raised his chin and repeated, "If necessary, I'll trade my tomorrow for her awakening today." It was impossible not to feel the weight of those words. That moment sealed something invisible. The boy's sacrifice wasn't just an act of courage, it was a promise that transcended every barrier. A promise that touched everyone in the room, and even seemed to reach the young woman, trapped between life and death. It was as if his love and sacrifice echoed inside her, calling her back. In that hospital room, before disbelieving eyes, the weakest had become the strongest, and the millionaire, without realizing it, was beginning to lose the battle he thought he had already won. Amid the rising tension, a voice broke through, seemingly bringing relief. The young woman's uncle, the millionaire's brother, stood up with a conciliatory air. He spoke softly, calmly, as if to soothe the storm. "Perhaps we should listen to the boy, at least for a moment," he suggested, pretending to be the most reasonable of the family. Many breathed easier, believing someone had finally chosen compassion over money. But behind his calm mask lay darkness. He wasn't defending the girl or the boy. His interest was self-serving. He knew that if the machines were switched off, he would gain more control over the fortune, easier to manipulate without the daughter standing in the way. The masked man used his mediator's facade to poison minds. While asking for calm, he subtly hinted that the boy might be making it all up for attention. He planted doubt with carefully chosen words. Who's to say he didn't hear these stories from someone else? Children are creative, you know. With each phrase he sowed suspicion. The millionaire, still furious, found comfort in his brother's insinuations. It was easier to believe the boy was lying than to accept that his empire might collapse under the weight of truth. The boy, however, saw through the act. His innocent eyes recognized the shadow hidden behind the uncle's soothing tone. With courage, he revealed what the young woman had told him. That very uncle had been secretly betraying his own brother, siphoning off parts of the company and exploiting the millionaire's blind trust. The room fell into a stunned silence. All eyes turned to the man who had seemed the most balanced moments before. He tried to laugh it off, to change the subject, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The mask began to crack. The boy's words, once dismissed as childish faith, now carried the weight of revelation. The uncle, who had pretended to be the voice of reason, now looked cornered, his calm facade crumbling under the unexpected accusation. The millionaire, though resistant, could not ignore the sting of doubt. He knew of gaps in his businesses, money unaccounted for. And now, before everyone, the truth he refused to see was spoken aloud by the one person with nothing to lose. The room became a stage for revelations. The masked antagonist, once respected, now struggled to hold on to his image. He spoke of loyalty, tried to deny it, but no one was convinced anymore. With a single phrase, the boy had torn off his mask, exposing what many had suspected but never dared say. From that moment on, there was no turning back. The game was no longer just between the millionaire and the boy. A new enemy had stepped into the light, willing to do anything to keep the truth buried. The doctor, pressured by the family and the millionaire, raised his clipboard and spoke gravely. "It's time to turn them off. There are no clinical signs of recovery. Keeping the machines running only prolongs the inevitable." His words fell like a final decree. Many lowered their heads in resignation. Logic was merciless. Statistics, scans, and reports all pointed to the same outcome. The young woman would not wake up, but the boy, still standing by her side, didn't falter. His eyes burned with tears, but his voice rang firm. "You see numbers. I hear her heart, and it's still beating for a reason." Everyone stared at him as if he were insane. How could a poor boy challenge specialists, machines, diagnoses? The doctor, impatient, snapped back. "That's not how it works. Science doesn't run on wishes." But the boy lifted his head, his courage shining. "Maybe science doesn't, but love does. And her love is stronger than any statistic." The clash between reason and faith became the very heart of the room. Each sentence from the boy cracked the walls of logic, holding up the decision to turn off the machines. The millionaire, enraged, saw the boy's conviction as a direct insult to his authority. "You know nothing. You're just a street kid," he shouted. But the reply came with disarming simplicity. "Yes, I'm just a kid, but I'm the kid she trusted with her secrets. And I know she'll come back." His words echoed like prophecy, leaving even the skeptics unsettled. This wasn't only about life and death anymore. It was a clash between worlds, cold calculation against unshakable hope. Suddenly, something subtle stirred. A faster beep on the monitor, a faint twitch in her chest. Small signs that, for doctors, could be dismissed as reflexes, but for the boy were proof. He gripped her hand and whispered, "If you hear me, fight. Show them it's not your time." The room held its breath. The doctor tried to rationalize, calling it involuntary reflex, but no one could look away. Faith had begun to defy logic before their very eyes. And in that moment, the power of hope revealed itself, both cruel and beautiful. Cruel because it left the millionaire powerless, watching his control slip away. Beautiful because it reignited in everyone the spark that the impossible could become real. The boy, small and unlikely, carried the flame of hope alone. And before him, even the coldest began to hesitate. The clash between faith and logic didn't just divide the room, it transformed it into a stage for something greater, a prelude to the impossible about to unfold. The air in the room grew heavier, as if time itself had stopped. The doctor prepared to follow protocol while the millionaire, impatient, demanded they end it once and for all. But the moment the doctor's hand reached for the switch, the impossible happened. The young woman moved her lips, as if trying to form words. A collective gasp echoed through the room. The heart monitor spiked with stronger signals, and her fingers gently squeezed the boy's hand. That single gesture was enough to turn skepticism into shock. What was deemed a miracle began to unfold before everyone's eyes. The millionaire staggered back, pale, as if he'd seen a ghost. Accustomed to controlling fates, he suddenly faced something his wealth could neither explain nor stop. The boy wept, but his tears carried the weight of silent triumph. He knew she had heard him. that his faith had not been in vain. Everyone stood frozen between doubt and awe. The young woman, though not fully awake, whispered a single word: "Wait." That word, filled with life, shattered every argument that supported the logic of giving up. The masked uncle tried to recover, insisting it was just reflexes, nothing definitive, but his voice sounded weak, stripped of authority. His mask had finally crumbled. The doctor, stunned, could no longer stand on science alone. He stammered, searching for technical explanations, but his face betrayed disbelief. The improbable had become real, and everyone knew they were witnessing something that defied the ordinary rules of life. The girl didn't return fully, but every tiny sign was a scream against reason. The boy clutched her hand, whispering, "I knew it. I told you you'd come back." The millionaire, crushed by his own arrogance, sank into a chair, powerless to maintain his pose of authority. For the first time, he was no longer the strongest man in the room. Power had shifted, carried by the faith of a poor boy no one had believed in. The whole room breathed as though witnessing a rebirth. And in that moment, poetic justice revealed itself. The unlikely, the impossible, the discarded became the ultimate answer. Reports, fortunes, and threats no longer mattered. What kept the girl alive wasn't money or influence. It was the faith, love, and courage of a boy who dared to challenge giants. The unexpected twist not only saved a life, it rewrote the story before everyone's eyes, proving that when least expected, truth always finds a way to rise. The millionaire, who had always stood like an unshakable giant, crumbled before everyone's eyes. The arrogance once filling his voice dissolved into stifled sobs. He tried to hide it, but the tears broke through his mask. For the first time in decades, this powerful man revealed fear, vulnerability, impotence. The same man who had coldly ordered the machines turned off now trembled at the thought of losing his daughter for good, not through medical decision, but through his own near condemnation of hope. The entire room watched a man break from within. The masked uncle, watching his brother collapse, also revealed his true self. There was no calm tone left, no false serenity. His face twisted with rage as he realized all his schemes were falling apart. The plan to inherit part of the fortune, to erase the young woman from the path, crumbled with every stronger beep of the heart monitor. He muttered curses, his eyes burning with hatred at the boy, as if that child were the ruin of all his ambition. Human fragility now appeared not only as fear, but as desperation at the loss of control. The doctor, once the distant technical figure, dropped his clipboard. His tearful eyes reflected not only the shock of the impossible, but also the guilt of nearly declaring the end of a life that stubbornly fought to stay. He struggled to steady himself, but emotion overcame him. I've never seen anything like this," he admitted, his voice cracking. The weight of responsibility, of science's limits against the unexplainable, forced him to face his own fragility as both a professional and a human being. And there was the boy, small, weeping as well, but for a different reason. Not fear, but relief. His tear-streaked face revealed that even the strongest in spirit carry the pain of fighting against a world that doubts them. His fragility didn't diminish him, it magnified him. Because in each tear was truth, purity, and love, and everyone in the room felt that those tears held more value than any fortune. The young woman, still caught between life and death, became a mirror of this shared fragility. Even unconscious, her body fought, responded, refused to surrender. Every irregular breath, every faint movement, reminded them all that life is fragile, precious, and unpredictable. The scene united everyone in collective vulnerability. Rich and poor, skeptics and believers, all stood stripped of their masks. The hospital room was no longer a stage for power or authority. It was a stage for human fragility and the strength that can be born from it. The tension in the room was no longer the same as in the beginning. The millionaire, once towering, now looked like any other man, with red eyes and trembling hands. He stared at his daughter and saw not just the heiress of his empire, but the only person capable of exposing his hidden humanity beneath layers of pride and coldness. The boy, still holding her hand, said nothing. Silence spoke for him. It was as if they both waited for the final answer. Life or death, rebirth or farewell. The entire room breathed in that suspense, that weight heavier than any diagnosis. Then, the young woman opened her eyes slightly. It wasn't a full awakening, but enough to change everything. Her voice, faint as a whisper, called her father. I heard everything." Those words, almost drowned by the machines, struck the millionaire's soul like lightning. He fell to his knees beside her bed, sobbing, begging for forgiveness, for the first time not as a businessman or tycoon, but as a father. Everyone there witnessed the final breaking of a man who once believed himself untouchable. The masked uncle, realizing it was over, tried to slip out but was stopped by the very guards who no longer blindly obeyed power. The boy's revelation echoed like a verdict. The traitor's mask had finally fallen. The doctor, still shaken, admitted he had no explanation for the sudden response, but confessed, "Medicine doesn't have all the answers." That sentence hung in the air as a reminder that life transcends logic. The boy smiled through his tears, a smile both tired and triumphant. He knew this battle wasn't only about saving the girl, but about proving that faith, love, and courage could still topple the arrogance of power. The girl squeezed his hand more tightly, silently thanking him. The millionaire looked at the boy, wordless, finally recognizing his own defeat. A defeat not of business or wealth, but of his illusion of absolute control. And so the ending brought no easy answers. The girl was still fragile, her future uncertain. The millionaire would forever carry the guilt of nearly making the gravest mistake of his life. The boy would remain a symbol of hope, but also of defiance against a world that underestimates the small. It was an open yet transformative ending. No one in that room would ever be the same again. The lesson was clear. Life isn't measured in fortunes, but in the invisible bonds only the heart understands. And to you who followed this story to the end, here's the invitation. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and share in the comments. Would you have believed the boy?